The tall man in a cheap suit, holding a clipboard, stomped up my driveway and barked. "Final notice! You've got 7 days to vacate this property. HOA board's orders." I blinked, still holding my coffee mug, barely awake. He stood right at the edge of my ranch, just beside the fence, looking smug. Behind him were 2 more HOA members, including Karen, the infamous woman in oversized sunglasses, even indoors, who thought she ran the world. "Excuse me, but what exactly am I being evicted from?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "From this ranch," he said. "You're in violation of multiple HOA codes, non-approved fencing, non-regulation barn paint, livestock over the HOA limit," he added with a smirk, "and unauthorized solar panel installation. That's a big one." I took a slow sip from my coffee mug and replied, "You do realize I'm not part of your HOA, right?" Karen laughed, her tone condescending. "Oh, we expanded last month. You're in it now, sweetheart." That's when it hit me. These people had no idea. They had no clue that not only was I not part of their HOA, but I actually owned the land beneath their entire HOA building. Yes, the very land their meetings took place on, where they sent newsletters from, and proudly called their community HQ. I had the title deed in a fireproof safe, but I didn't say a word. Not yet. I just looked at them and calmly said, "Good to know. I'll look into it." They turned around and walked off, one of them already scribbling something on their clipboard. As I watched them leave, a smile crept onto my face. Let me take you back a bit, though. My name is Mark Dalton. I'm 43 years old, a retired U.S. Army logistics officer, and after 2 decades of deployments, I decided to settle down somewhere quiet, somewhere I could finally breathe and build a life on my own terms. I bought 45 acres in Arizona, wide open, peaceful, surrounded by mountains. I built a modest home, raised horses, grew my own vegetables, and for the first time in years, I finally slept through the night. Back then, there was no HOA. My land was pure, free from politics, and it was perfect. But like most good things, that peace didn't last. A year later, developers rolled in. Big trucks, men in hard hats and blueprints sprawled across pickup hoods. I didn't mind the growth, it was inevitable. The land next to mine was sold off, and a luxury neighborhood called Hidden Pines Estates started taking shape. Fancy homes, manicured lawns, streetlights that dimmed automatically at night. And of course, with those homes came a homeowners association. At first, they left me alone. I wasn't part of their development. I had my own separate entry road, and my boundaries were clearly mapped out. But as the neighborhood grew, so did their egos. It started with letters, bold printed demands. First, they asked me to update my fencing to match the aesthetic of the community. Then came a suggestion to reconsider the livestock on my land. And soon, warnings about my solar panels, none of which I paid any attention to. That didn't sit well with Karen. Karen Whitmore was the HOA president. She lived in the biggest house on the block, a 4-story glass monstrosity with robotic lawnmowers and a fountain that glowed blue at night. She wore pearls to every meeting, and once tried to ban kids from riding scooters after 4 p.m. because it disrupted her wine hour. Karen took my silence as a challenge. She started showing up unannounced, standing near my gate, taking pictures of my barn and my horses, frowning at my truck, calling it an eyesore. She even left a note in my mailbox once saying, "You'd be surprised what a bulldozer can fix." That was the last straw. I reported her to the local sheriff, but they told me there wasn't much they could do as long as she wasn't trespassing. So, I installed cameras, high quality, motion activated with night vision, and linked them straight to my phone. One morning, I found Karen on my land, recording a video while loudly declaring that my ranch was a safety hazard and unfit for a civilized community. I filed a legal cease and desist letter, but the HOA didn't back down. In fact, they doubled down. And that brings us to today. They weren't just harassing me anymore, they were trying to evict me. What they didn't know was that years before any of this started, I had bought a 5-acre plot of land next to mine for horse trails. It was undeveloped back then, but when the developers came in to build Hidden Pines Estates, they needed that land for their HOA building. They assumed it belonged to the original developer. They were wrong. It was mine. And somehow, the title company made a clerical error and missed it. So, while they built their fancy clubhouse and HOA offices, they did it on land I owned. I let them build. After all, sometimes the best revenge is the slowest kind. But now they were pushing too far.
Eviction notices?
Really? That morning, I walked back into my house, poured another cup of coffee and pulled the deed from my safe. It was all there, original deeds, signed, notarized, protected. They had messed with the wrong rancher. I began drafting a letter, not just to the HOA, but to every homeowner in Hidden Pines Estates. They needed to know who the true owner of their HOA building was. But as I started writing, something caught my eye on the security feed. 3 HOA members, Karen included, were back at my gate. This time, they weren't holding clipboards. They were carrying chains and bolt cutters. My heart raced as I watched in disbelief. Karen pointed at the padlock on my gate, and before I knew it, the man beside her sliced it open. They stepped onto my land. That's when I snapped. I grabbed my phone, dialed the sheriff, and stormed out of my house. Karen stood there with a smug smile, saying, "We're here for the inspection. You didn't respond to our notice, so we're taking initiative." I stopped just short of them and said, "You broke my lock. You're trespassing. I've got it all on camera, and I'm pressing charges." The sheriff was on the line, and within minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. Karen's confidence melted faster than ice in the Arizona sun. The deputies informed her that the property wasn't under HOA jurisdiction, and that she had no legal right to be there. They even cited her and warned her that if she returned, she'd be arrested on the spot. But this wasn't over yet. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not just any letter, but a revelation. "You may not know me," it began. "I'm Mark Dalton, owner of the ranch next door. What you don't know is that I also own the land beneath your HOA's main building." I included copies of the deed, aerial maps, and even a notarized statement confirming their headquarters had been illegally built on my land. The next morning, I hand-delivered over 200 copies to every mailbox in Hidden Pines. By sunset, my phone was blowing up. Homeowners were calling, texting, asking questions. But Karen? She never saw this coming. The HOA board never saw it coming. After my letter went out, residents of Hidden Pines Estates showed up at my gate, some furious, not at me, but at the board for hiding the truth. A few homeowners even apologized on behalf of the community, and one woman named Lisa even brought me a pie. But the best part? The HOA board was forced to hold an emergency meeting that night, but they couldn't meet at their fancy building. They had to hold it on a neighbor's patio because their building was now off-limits. I watched it all unfold from my porch with a cold glass of sweet tea, feeling a sense of satisfaction. But just when I thought things had quieted down, something unexpected happened. 3 nights later at 2 a.m., I woke up to the frantic whinnying of my horses and the smell of smoke. Someone had thrown a flare into my hay storage. By the time I rushed outside with a fire extinguisher, the flames had already started creeping along the barn's corner. I barely contained it. If I hadn't woken up, the entire barn could have gone up in flames. Standing there in the dark, shaking with the ash still on my clothes, I knew this wasn't over. Someone wanted me gone, and they were willing to play dirty. The sheriff arrived immediately after my 911 call. I showed them the damage and the flare casing I found on the ground. My security footage revealed a silhouette slipping through the trees carrying a gas can. Deputy Owens looked at the scene and said, "This wasn't an accident. Someone came here with intent." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch with my shotgun across my lap, staring at the barn under the bright floodlights. I wasn't just angry, I was disappointed. I had tried to live peacefully, but someone in Hidden Pines had decided to escalate things. If they couldn't push me out with rules and fines, they'd try to burn me out instead. The next day, I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Evelyn Grant, a sharp ex-military JAG lawyer, didn't waste any time. "This is arson," she said, flipping through the police report and security footage. "And if we can connect this to the HOA board, we'll bury them." I was done being pushed around. "I want to file suit," I said. Let's make this public. Evelyn agreed, outlining our strategy. A cease and desist against further HOA contact, and then a civil suit. But if we could connect this flare incident to anyone on their board, it would become criminal. When I returned home that afternoon, I found a note pinned to my gate. You should have left when you had the chance. That night, I beefed up my security, new floodlights, 2 more cameras, motion sensors around the barn, and I even moved my horses to a friend's stable for their safety. But as I was tightening the last camera bolt, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was Karen. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, arms crossed, staring at me. After a long, cold moment, she turned and walked back into the trees. I had no idea what was coming next. Then, 2 days later, a surprising twist. Greg Walker, a retired surveyor and Hidden Pines homeowner, showed up at my door. He wore an old veteran ball cap and carried a thick binder. I got your letter, he said. And I've got something you need to see. I invited him in, and he opened the binder to reveal detailed land surveys, dated 7 years before the Hidden Pines project even began. The developer never filed an easement agreement for that clubhouse, he explained. They just assumed you were part of the planning committee. Greg's voice grew serious. I've lived next to Karen for 3 years. What they're doing to you is disgusting. You're a better neighbor than any of them. He handed me copies of the maps and said, Do what you gotta do. I emailed Evelyn the documents that night, and within hours, she sent me a new draft of the lawsuit with claims of land theft, zoning fraud, and criminal trespassing. But while we were preparing for the lawsuit, another storm hit. Arizona skies opened up in a brutal monsoon. The wind howled and lightning cracked the sky. Around 1:30 a.m., a bolt struck an old oak tree near the HOA building. I heard the sirens before I saw the glow. The HOA building was on fire. By the time firefighters arrived, half the roof had collapsed, and the flames had consumed the walls. It was chaos. Neighbors came out in their robes, watching the very heart of their precious community burn to the ground. I stood on my porch, drenched and stunned, feeling nothing but stillness. But something told me this fire wasn't an accident. The next morning, the sheriff returned. Signs of foul play, Deputy Owens said. Someone cut the power and doused the main hall with accelerant. This was deliberate. As I stood there in the wreckage, Karen, red-eyed and furious, pointed her phone at me. He did this, she screamed. He wanted revenge. He threatened us. He destroyed the clubhouse. Neighbors gasped, and cameras clicked. I stood still. I hadn't done anything, but in that moment, the HOA was trying to flip the narrative and make me the villain. Deputy Owens stepped in between us, raising his hands. Everyone back up, he ordered. We're not making any accusations until we have solid evidence. That includes you, Miss Whitmore. Karen glared at him but stormed off to her car, fuming. The next day, I took my security footage to the sheriff's office. I had an entire archive of footage showing me at home all night, pacing on the porch, cleaning out the barn, even making tea. There wasn't a single frame of me anywhere near the HOA building. Meanwhile, the fire investigators confirmed that the blaze wasn't caused by lightning. Gasoline had been poured in at least 3 locations inside the building, and there was no sign of forced entry. Whoever did it had a key. The rumor mill in Hidden Pines went wild. Some people said, I knew it, he was always the troublemaker. But they didn't know the full story. The rumors in Hidden Pines ran wild. Some whispered maybe Karen had set the fire herself for sympathy or insurance. Others believed it could have been one of the HOA board members, trying to get rid of documents they didn't want anyone to see. But the real hammer dropped 3 days later, when the insurance company denied the HOA's claim. Why? Because the building wasn't legally theirs. I got the call from Evelyn while I was feeding the chickens. Guess what? She said with a chuckle. We just got a letter from their insurance provider. During the property assessment, someone finally pulled the land deed. And guess whose name was on it? Yours. I nearly dropped the feed bucket from laughing. Karen had spent months trying to run me off my own ranch, and now her precious HOA headquarters was a pile of ashes. And the best part? Nobody was going to help her rebuild. But while the HOA board scrambled to find a way out, a new twist unraveled. That evening, Evelyn called again. "You need to come by the office," she said. "We received a packet from a whistleblower." I drove over immediately, eager to know more. Inside a manila envelope were photocopies of leaked emails between HOA board members. One email in particular caught my eye. It was from Karen Whitmore's hiddenpineshoa.com email address to the board's official address, with the subject line, "Removing the obstacle." The email read, "If we can't get Dalton out legally, maybe it's time we encourage him to leave another way. I've asked Gary to look into options. He's got connections." I stared at the printed page for what felt like an eternity. Evelyn's voice was calm, but her words hit like a freight train. "That's criminal. Conspiracy to harass. Possibly attempted intimidation. If we can verify this came from her real email, this could go federal." "Who sent it?" I asked. Evelyn slid forward a small yellow sticky note. 2 words were written in neat handwriting. "Greg Walker." The same man who had brought me the land surveys. The same man who had quietly lived in Hidden Pines, watching everything unfold. I had to see him. That night, I knocked on his door, and he greeted me with a tired smile and a folder in his hand. "I used to believe in HOAs," he said. "I thought they were about building good communities, keeping people honest. But Karen," she twisted it. "It became about control. About fear." I asked, "Why did you decide to help me?" "I almost stayed quiet," he admitted. "But then I saw your barn nearly burn. That was the line. Someone had to do the right thing." He handed me the rest of the emails, more evidence, more names, and a copy of a wire transfer that linked Gary, the guy with the bolt cutters, to one of the HOA's slush funds. They paid him to mess with my ranch. The flare? Not a random act of vandalism, but an orchestrated attack. I left Greg's house with everything I needed. The evidence, the witness, the motive. I felt a fire building inside me, ready to bring this to an end once and for all. But as I reached my porch, something stopped me dead in my tracks. There was an envelope taped to my front door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photo, a picture of my ranch taken from inside the HOA clubhouse before it burned. On the back, written in red marker, were the words, "You should have stayed quiet. Next time, it won't just be hay that burns." I stood there, frozen. The message was clear. They weren't done with me yet. It was that moment that hit me hard. This was no longer just a legal battle. Someone was gearing up for a full-scale war. I stared at the picture for what seemed like forever. My ranch, framed perfectly through the tinted windows of a clubhouse. It wasn't just any photo. It looked like a target. And the note on the back? It was more than a threat. It was personal. Bold, fiery, and signed in flames. The realization sank in deep. I knew what I had to do. I locked up every gate, double-checked the cameras, and rearmed the perimeter alarms. I even moved my horses and my dog, Brutus, to my brother's ranch, 30 miles away, just to be safe. But there was one thing left. I wasn't going to wait for things to get worse. I was going to act. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's office with the photo and a pile of whistleblower documents. Deputy Owens immediately brought in a special crimes investigator from the county. They took one look at everything: the email from Karen, the threatening note, the payment record to Gary, and the wheels of justice began to turn. "This isn't just harassment anymore," Owens said, his voice serious. "We're looking at conspiracy, arson, property damage, and possibly attempted murder." If that flare had gone off when someone was in the barn, it didn't bear thinking about. "I don't want to wait until someone's hurt," I said. "Let's move fast." The next steps were swift. We started the investigation, subpoenaing HOA financials, and verifying emails. But I wasn't just going to wait around for that process to play out. That afternoon, I called in a few friends, army buddies, retirees like me, people who owed me a favor, or just wanted an excuse for a country getaway. In just 2 days, I had a crew of 4 staying at my place, patrolling, setting up surveillance. They weren't just watching. They were working in shifts, operating like a military base. We were invisible in the trees, Nothing and no one was going to get past us unnoticed. But on the third night, they tried again. At 2:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected near the north fence. Brutus was barking like crazy from my brother's ranch miles away. We weren't just dealing with amateurs. I grabbed my rifle and stepped outside, already knowing one of my old comrades, Wyatt, was in position with night vision goggles. The feed popped up. A figure, crawling through tall grass toward the generator shack. Wyatt radioed. I see him. One suspect, carrying a jerry can. Don't engage, I whispered. Just record. Let's catch him red-handed. We followed him silently, keeping our distance, until he reached the shack. He opened the fuel cap and began pouring something, likely gas. Then, suddenly he froze. A red laser dot appeared on his chest. Hands in the air. I shouted, stepping from the shadows. He spun and bolted, right into one of our wire traps. The snap of the trap sent him tumbling to the ground with a scream. We called the sheriff. They arrived in 12 minutes. When they pulled off his mask, we saw him. Gary, red-haired, sunburned, and as dumb as ever. He didn't say a word, but we didn't need his confession. The jerry can, the trap, the footage, it was more than enough. The next morning, the sheriff issued a warrant for Karen. By evening, Hidden Pines was aflame, figuratively speaking. News of her criminal investigation spread fast, and residents were outraged. They called for her immediate removal. But Karen wasn't done yet. While the sheriff was serving her warrant, Karen had already packed up and fled town, leaving one last parting gift, a full-page article in the local paper, titled, Veteran Rancher Poses Threat to HOA Safety. The piece was a twisted mix of lies and half-truths, painting me as a dangerous, unhinged threat. I couldn't help but laugh when I read it. The truth was already catching up with her. A week later, the police tracked her to a hotel in Flagstaff. She was arrested without incident and brought back in handcuffs. That image went viral on the Hidden Pines Facebook page. A smug Karen in a designer tracksuit, shoved into a cruiser. But then came the twist that no one saw coming. 3 days after her arrest, I got a letter from her lawyer. Karen was offering a settlement, $1.2 million for the land where the HOA building stood, as well as to resolve any remaining claims. I couldn't stop laughing. I called Evelyn. What do we say? I asked. We say no, she said calmly. Because now, you own the story. The longer it plays out, the more their reputation burns. But revenge wasn't on my mind. I had a different plan. I called a town meeting, inviting every resident of Hidden Pines. Over 100 showed up. Standing in front of them, cowboy hat in hand, I said, I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to build something better. And then, I made the announcement. I was donating the land where the clubhouse once stood to a local veterans nonprofit. They would rebuild not an HOA headquarters, but a community center, a place for families, school groups, and yes, even the HOA, if they played nice. The crowd erupted in applause. Some were in tears. Even Greg Walker, who had been one of Karen's biggest supporters, gave me a thumbs up. But just as things seemed to settle, I got a call from Evelyn. You need to get down here, she said, breathless. Someone just filed a counterclaim. Guess who? I sighed. Don't tell me she's back, and she's suing you for defamation and emotional distress? Karen wasn't done yet. When Evelyn told me that Karen was suing for defamation and emotional distress, I almost laughed, until she read the first line of the filing aloud. The defendant's actions caused irreparable damage to my client's reputation, mental health, and social standing in her community. The accusation? That I'd launched a smear campaign with malicious intent. I rubbed my forehead. She tried to burn down my barn, I muttered. Evelyn, ever the calm one, replied. She knows that. But she's cornered now. This is her last desperate swing. She's trying to flip the narrative before her trial. She was playing the victim. Exactly, Evelyn agreed. We filed a motion to dismiss, but the thing about courts is, they move slowly. While we waited, the media got involved. Local news channels picked up the story. HOA president sues ranch owner after arson arrest. Karen's lawyer took to the airwaves, painting her as a community builder, a victim traumatized by my so-called campaign of hatred. They showed pictures of her in a neck brace, claiming stress had given her migraines and panic attacks. One station even aired footage of her sitting tearfully in her lawyer's office. It was all theater, a performance, but the damage was real. Suddenly, people started pulling away. A few neighbors stopped waving. One even canceled a writing lesson for their kid, saying, "We just don't want to get involved anymore." That cut deeper than I expected. I had poured everything into that ranch, into that community. I'd tried to give back, to be kind, to help those around me. But now, I was being painted as the villain. But I didn't get bitter. I got smart. Greg Walker reached out again.
You know what you need?
He asked. The truth. Public and loud. And that's exactly what we did. Greg called in a favor from his niece, Savannah, a local journalist with an independent YouTube channel. We invited her to the ranch, sat her down, cameras rolling, mic pinned to my shirt. I told her everything. The harassment, the fake fines, the lock cutting, the arson, the photograph threat, and the big secret they didn't expect. I owned the land their precious HOA building sat on. Savannah asked all the right questions. She even interviewed Greg, Deputy Owens, and Lisa, the neighbor who had brought me a pie after the letter went out. The video went live that Friday, titled, "The HOA Tried to Evict a Rancher, Then Found Out He Owned Their Land." In less than 48 hours, it had 2.3 million views. Comments flooded in. "This is wild. Karen belongs in jail." And, "The way he handled this with calm and facts. Legend. You should run for mayor, Mark." Suddenly, everything flipped. People started waving again. More pies showed up at my gate. Strangers emailed, thanking me for standing up. Veterans from across the country messaged, "You fought for us and you're still fighting." Even some of Karen's supporters from Hidden Pines quietly resigned from the HOA board. But Karen? She doubled down. Her lawyer pushed for an emergency hearing, claiming the video was retaliatory. They demanded it be taken down. But the judge refused. "Freedom of speech," he said. Then, Evelyn called. Her voice was steady but tight. "Mark, they're moving forward with criminal charges against Karen, for the arson. And more, attempted intimidation, conspiracy, and obstruction." It turned out, Karen had someone delete surveillance footage from the HOA building days before it burned. That was a bombshell. The court date was set. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Karen Whitmore's ego. 2 weeks before the trial, I was on my porch enjoying a quiet evening when something felt off. My camera alerts weren't pinging. Not a single one. That had never happened before. I checked the app. All systems were offline. Every single one. I stepped off the porch, flashlight in hand, scanning the property under the moonlit sky. My heart raced as I saw it. A dark SUV parked just beyond my fence, its engine running, headlights off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I approached cautiously. The windows were too dark to see through, but then, the driver's side door creaked open. Out stepped Karen, her hair pulled back, eyes wild. Gone was the pristine HOA president in pearls. Before me stood a woman cornered, unraveling. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, keeping my distance. She let out a bitter laugh, the sound low and mocking. "You think you've won, don't you?" She sneered. I didn't respond, but my mind was racing. "I built that community," she snapped. "I shaped it, gave it rules, order, respect. And then you came in with your horses, your land, and your self-righteous lectures. They listened to you, and you tried to burn my life down." My voice was firm as I replied, "That's not leadership, Karen. That's cowardice." Her lip trembled, but she didn't stop. "You don't get it. People don't follow rules unless you force them. You have to control them or they turn on you. I saved that neighborhood." I shook my head slowly. "No, Karen. You didn't save it. You infected it." She took a step forward, but I raised my phone. "Sheriff's office is already tracking this visit. You're violating your bond terms just by being here." She froze. I bluffed, But she didn't know that. Her breath hitched, and she backed away slowly. Turning, she climbed into her SUV, slamming the door. Before she drove off, she shot me one last threatening look. "This isn't over," she said, her tires kicking up dirt as she peeled off into the night. And just like that, the silence returned. But I knew this was far from over. The final chapter was just around the corner. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors from Hidden Pines, sheriff deputies, and curious locals who had seen the viral video all gathered for the showdown. Karen Whitmore versus the state of Arizona. And me. I sat quietly in the front row, wearing my cleanest flannel shirt and boots, only for church or court. Karen entered, flanked by 2 lawyers, looking pale, her makeup thick and her shoulders stiff. She still tried to act like she was in charge, but the moment she saw the evidence lined up against her, video clips, emails, photos, and whistleblower documents, she knew she was cornered. The prosecution went first. They showed the security footage of Karen at my gate, Gary caught with a gas can, Greg's statement, and printed emails. One by one, each piece stacked against her, too high for her to climb. Then came the photo of my ranch, taken from the HOA building window, with a handwritten threat on the back. I saw Karen's eyes dart nervously toward her lawyers. She was rattled. It was my turn to speak. I took the stand, took a deep breath, and calmly told the story. From the day she tried to find me for my red barn, to the flare in my hay pile, to the ghostly figure of her standing at the edge of my trees. I didn't shout, didn't cry. I just told the truth. When I finished, you could hear a pin drop. Karen's lawyer tried to cross-examine me. "You've had military training, Mr. Dalton," she said. "Isn't it true you're trained to handle conflict physically?" "I'm trained to de-escalate," I replied. "But if you're asking if I'm capable of defending my home and family, you bet I am." She pressed. "Isn't it also true you posted a public video that painted Ms. Whitmore as a criminal before she was convicted?" "She painted herself," I said. "I just turned on the light." The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The defense tried to salvage the case by claiming Karen had no idea Gary acted under her orders, that the emails were taken out of context, and that she had been overwhelmed by leadership responsibilities. But none of it stuck. 3 days later, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all charges. Karen was sentenced to 4 years probation and 6 months in county jail, with a pending civil trial for damages. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. Hidden Pines HOA collapsed like a house of cards. The residents voted to dissolve the board and create a new volunteer-based committee focused on community events, not punishment. They invited me to the first meeting as a guest of honor. I didn't go for the applause, I went because I wanted to see what healing looked like. Lisa brought cupcakes, Greg was nominated as treasurer, and even Karen's quiet husband shook my hand and simply said, "Thank you." After that meeting, I returned home to my peaceful ranch, the horses grazing quietly in the pasture. The cameras were silent for the first time in months. The new Veterans Community Center had broken ground, with local volunteers and donations pouring in. Kids came every Saturday to ride, and pony lessons had tripled in demand. The barn, which almost burned down, now echoed with laughter and hope. I kept that photo, the one Karen left with the threat. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the people who scream the loudest don't have the power, they're just scared of those who do. And that if you stand your ground, speak the truth and stay kind, the land will always defend you. So, to anyone dealing with a Karen, a crooked board, or anyone trying to push you off your rightful place, stand tall. Because you never know, you just might own the land they're standing on. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. And if you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who could use a little justice and peace today.